You stay out of the beds. You go right to the beds every time I say stay out of the beds. All right, welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I typically do on Sundays. I'm recording this on Saturday. Tonight we have a chance of a light frost. I don't know if it'll probably in my urban area here in Zone 7B, we probably won't get much of a frost. This past week, I put up a video on expanding this little bed, cutting this turf down a little bit. I think you can see some of that compost here. I know I'll get asked. That is Autumn Bonfire Encore Azalea right there. The one that's down on the ground is Autumn Fire Encore Azalea. The Loropetalum, the purple Loropetalum over my shoulder here, which seems kind of dark in the video. Maybe you can see it better than I think you can. That is Carolina Midnight Loropetalum. The yellow plant that's down here is a St. John's wort, a gold St. John's wort. I think you can, yeah, you can see that. Okay, and that's Holly, who's in most of the videos. I shot a video this week on invasive plants and just how I kind of defending against them here. I'm completely surrounded by invasive plants that are dropping seed into this landscape. I don't think you will have seen that when you see this video. I don't think I'll have time to get it edited before, but maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. And now I have somebody's car alarm going off. I'm assuming you guys can hear that. I don't know why. Okay, no more car alarm. Let's get started on some questions from last week. Somebody asked me about when I take my seedlings out into the rain. So all the things I'm starting from seed in the house. I had stuff out here in the rain all week, but I'm super careful on things that have just barely germinated, having heavy rain on them, because it will wash some of the soil out of them. And I use a tray that's a solid bottom tray, so when I bring my stuff out, I definitely I take that solid bottom off the tray and just have the tray itself. So I do like to get natural rain on them. That is the best kind of water. The water that falls from the sky is the best kind of water. And so as soon as they'll hold the cell together a little bit, and it's not super heavy rain, I have them out in the rain and in the sun as quick as possible. Somebody asked if I tie up my daffodils or any of my bulbs. You know, you can roll them up, tie them up, put a rubber band around them or something like that, and let them continue to get sun from the energy without, sun's energy without, being kind of ugly in the landscape. I don't tie any of them up. I have other perennials that are coming up in them. So I try to plant, the bulbs have been planted where other things are going to come up in them. So fairly quickly, my daffodils, even if they're kind of unsightly for a little while, other things will come up through them and I'll be planting into them. So I don't worry about it. Somebody asked about digging up an azalea over a gas line and wanted to know, since it's over the gas line, they don't want to be digging around it. And can they just cut it off at the ground and then cover it with something? Now, yeah, I guess you could cut it off flush and cover it with a piece of plastic or some, deep mulch for a little while. It'll probably try to come up through that. Your gas lines are put in pretty daggone deep, and azaleas are typically very shallow rooted. So I would give it a chance, you do you, but likely I would try to dig that thing, dig down about 6 inches and see if you can just peel it back, without digging too deep. But again, gas lines are typically deep. Azaleas are usually shallow rooted. I think you can probably get it out of there without causing any damage, but Jim didn't recommend it if you are calling your attorney afterwards. So keep that in mind. That's what I would do. I did not recommend you do the same. But if you want to cut it off flush to the ground and then, deny it light for a while, that'll kill it as well. This person with this alarm. All right. They figured out the key fob again. All right. Somebody asked about if there are any interesting nurseries that they can visit if they're coming to central North Carolina. They actually said western North Carolina, and I don't know any other that are open to the public. I mean, obviously there's interesting garden centers across the entire state, so not discounting that, but actual growers. Camellia Forest is open to the public in Chapel Hill. Plant Delight's Nursery is about to have one of their spring. If you time your visit with one of their open weekends, you can go on their website. Everybody else here, there are lots of interesting garden centers to visit and lots of interesting gardens to visit. But it's in terms of growers, Camellia Forest and Plant Delights here. Garden Treasures is in Zebulon, and they're open on weekends this time of year as well, and have lots of interesting. He has tons of interesting things. Somebody asked me, since I said my tulips, a lot of my tulips are annuals here, or they decline year over year. Do I dig them out of the ground? I do not, and I had some come back and bloom this year from last year. So, you know, despite the fact that I expect them to not be as good year over year, they could be as good. So, you know, I'm hopeful on that. Somebody got a Ruby Falls red bud, and it's only staked about 3 feet high. I've got Golden Falls back here that's staked about 7 feet high, and they want it to be taller. Yes, you have to continue. You're going to have to stake it up higher. You're going to have to pick another piece and straighten it out and let it go up for a while, and then, you know, to the height that you want it. It will not get much taller than it is staked at 3 feet if you don't pick a piece, straighten it back out, and then stake it up higher. That's what you have to do with those, because every piece of it wants to fall down. Somebody asked me if I would plant star jasmine versus honeysuckle, which one was longer blooming. That was actually the question. I guess star jasmine's probably slightly longer than like coral honeysuckle, but they do both bloom about the same time. Maybe the star jasmine a little behind it in my area, because it usually gets nipped a bit in the wintertime, and the coral honeysuckle is native. The one advantage you get over the coral honeysuckle over the star jasmine is the ruby-throated hummingbirds absolutely love that plant, and so again, I always say you do you. The star jasmine's not invasive, so if you want to plant star jasmine, the fragrance for me for star jasmine is almost too much. On a good year when it blooms heavily is almost too much. So the honeysuckle's native. The honeysuckle will give you the hummingbirds. The star jasmine probably blooms a bit longer. So you decide. Somebody asked me about mulch against the foundation. I get this question all the time. I've had 2 houses in a row where I had a brick foundation on the last old house. This one has a cinder block foundation because it's an old house, and cinder block foundations were more common. But I've got mulch right up to it. It doesn't bother me. I mean, if I had wood going down to the ground, I definitely wouldn't have my mulch up against it. But I mean, I've got 2.5 feet all the way around the house where the wood mulch is against the cinder block. I'm not worried about it being that close to the house. I don't have any issue with it. People, it's always questions about termites with hardwood mulch. If your mulch is thin, I've never seen termites in it. I only see termites in old stumps, old logs, bigger chunks of wood. But it's not necessarily the conditions they're looking for to be in a very narrow, thin layer of mulch across the top of the ground. So I've never had an issue with it. If you had a big pile of mulch in your yard, I mean, that would be more susceptible to termites maybe, but I've never had any issue with termites in hardwood mulch in a thin layer across the ground or up against my house, because again, there's a lot of foundation between there and the actual wood on the house. Somebody asked me about growing like elfin thyme in their hell strip out by the road, looking for ground cover things. Especially here in the Raleigh area, the Ralston now has an interesting area that has a lot of really interesting ground covers in one space near the main building. And when you park in the parking lot, if you park in the parking lot, there's only like 20 parking spaces there. But if you park in the parking lot, it's very close to there. Of interesting ground covers. So there's lots of ground covers that will probably work well out in that hell strip area between the street and the sidewalk, that really tough kind of hot area out there. But thyme can definitely be part of that. And then there's other things that I would blend into it. You can use sedums and other things, but lots of ground covers that will work. Somebody asked me about converting Bermuda grass to beds, and that's kind of what this was here, except for I have zoysia grass, which is just greening back up. Zoysia is not quite as aggressive as Bermuda, but it does spread. I said in that video that Bermuda grass will outlast efforts like covering it. So if you cover it with a box, I bet the Bermuda grass will last longer under the box than the box will last in the elements outside. You know, I've got stones out in the front garden sitting on top of the zoysia grass that I haven't put in the ground yet. And I can pull those stones back, and about 3 days later, I guarantee you some of that zoysia will come back. And that stones have been sitting on there for months and months and months and months. So that's a stone, you know, not a box. The most effective way to get rid of Bermuda grass and create new beds is to either spray it or do what I did in that video, which is try to cut it out and then till it so that you can kill those roots, bring those roots up to the top and kill it. Unfortunately, Bermuda's just, it's not a great choice for houses. It's just not. It's a great choice for golf courses because people are taking big chunks out of the ground all day with irons, and you know that Bermuda fills back into those spaces very quickly. So it's very good at self-repairing, but in terms of having it as a home grass, I mean, gosh, what an annoyance. Zoysia is less aggressive for sure. But still, I have to go along here with my weed eater every time I mow and make sure that I'm cutting it to keep it from moving up into my beds. You know, even with a slightly less aggressive grass, it's still the same thing. But again, you can try to bury it in boxes and wood chips and compost and all those kinds of things. I think in the long run, though, you're better off either spraying it or physically removing it. Whichever of those two things you can physically do, you know, that it makes the most sense for you, I would do, and then cut it, you know, then cut in. And then still, you can use your boxes and your compost and your wood chips and all of those things. I'd highly recommend all of those things because they're great for, you know, at helping to build soil. I just think if you tried that directly over your Bermuda grass would come right up through it, or it would outweight you. So there you go. A lot of words. Somebody asked me about planting under Norway maples. Obviously, you're going to need Norway maples are one of the worst invasives. I didn't include that in the invasive video because I don't have them right here around my area. But what another terrible invasive tree. You know, you're definitely going to want, I don't know if there are deer near you. So if I recommend sitting here recommending hosta are something that can go under it and are drought tolerant enough to compete with it. And you can get in small enough pots that you can plant in between the roots. But, you know, if you have deer, you know, that takes out hosta. But you can use epimedium, brunera, acuba is a great shade, you know, drought tolerant shrub. I think, though, initially you're going to have to irrigate in this space. You can try to build up some, you know, soil to help you with your planting a little bit in the areas that you're planting, but I think you need to run a drip irrigation line. If I tell you acuba is great for dry shade, that doesn't mean you can go back there and plant an acuba and then walk away and not ever water it. That's not true at all. Once it's established, it would be very competitive against those Norway maples. But getting it established might take a couple of years of keeping an eye on it. But yeah, Norway maples are terrible. Somebody asked about netting for their sweet peas. They wanted some sort of netting that they can grow their vining sweet peas on. That stuff is called trellis netting. Sometimes you just need the words to search for, but if you search for trellis netting on Amazon or anywhere, you'll find the netting that you're looking for to grow vines on. Somebody asked me if I like penstemon. Yes, I have three different penstemon in the landscape. I have found, you know, I talked about, even last week, I talked about using drifts of one, where I have one of this and one of that and one of that. I do think that with penstemon, that wispy kind of little bit of growth that they have, that they probably look better with 3 or 5, you know, plants. And so I might come back in and add a couple here or there to kind of fatten up the penstemon I have. But I do have 3 varieties of penstemon in this landscape. They are great for pollinators. Somebody asked me, they have a black knot fungus on their black cherry tree, and they want to plant other prunus varieties in the landscape. You know, this black knot fungus is specific to things in the prunus family. Make sure you look on the resistant list. There are some prunus things that have shown resistant. There are several plums and others that have shown resistance to black knot fungus more than others. For me, if I was going to plant other ones, that one that you already have probably needs to go away. Let's see. Somebody got some new hellebores and they're leggy, floppy. Wanted to know if they should be cutting on them. I wouldn't. I don't wouldn't do a whole lot of cutting on your new plants. Just let it be floppy this first season. It was never going to be perfect the first season it was in the ground, but the growth that comes up on it next year will be bigger, better, fuller, and stronger. Somebody said their tulips were snapped off clean overnight. That was likely a deer. Deer do love tulips. That's my guess on that one. I get tons of questions about Japanese beetles all year long. I usually avoid those questions because there's not a lot of great answers. I was selling milky spore to customers when I was 16 years old at a garden center. Heck, even before that, I worked at an Ace Hardware or a True Value hardware store on New Bern Avenue in Raleigh when I was 14 and a half. I could get my work permit. Selling milky spore even there. I don't know that. I don't know what kind of impact it actually had on them over any period of time. Keep in mind, Japanese beetles lay most of their eggs in sunny turf patches, and so here in my neighborhood, that's an older established neighborhood with very large oaks, very little turf and full sun. We have very few Japanese beetles, so it's more typical in suburban neighborhoods that have been kind of clear cut. And have a lot more sunnier spaces. As you gain shade over time, you'll find some, lessening of the Japanese beetle problem. So I had more of them at the old house than I do at the new house. That's my point on that. And at the old house, I would have Charlie, my son, go around and thump them off of the plants into some dishwashing soap and some water. Somebody answered that below. That's exactly what I would do. Send them out with a little pan of dishwashing soap and have them thump them off into them to reduce their numbers. But, not a lot of great choices other than, people trying to treat the grubs in their lawn. And, I just didn't like to do any of that. The more bed space you have, the fluffier your soil is, following some of the things I've talked about on this channel all along about, compost and mulch and those kinds of things. My robins are back here cleaning a lot of this stuff out too. So I have an army of robins that do a lot of this work for me when they're in the grub stage. Okay, so more bed space and less lawns. Less lawn. Okay, somebody asked me, they had dug up some ferns or something and wanted to know about other natives that they could be transplanting. My video this week on, invasives, let's leave the native plants where they are. Let's don't transplant them. Most of the native, Google great native plants for the county that you live in, and then get seed, for them if you want to do this inexpensively. Most of the things that grow, Holly, no ma'am, come over here, come here. I'm not watching you eat grass. What are you doing? Come here, Holly, come. Okay, good girl. Okay, most of the things that are native to your area that are flowering or interesting, you can probably get from seed or find a native nursery or find a neighbor, that's already growing them and see, divide and split things and share things that way. But if they're out in if they're out in the wild and they're anchored in, let's leave them be. Somebody talked about their Chinese privet losing all of their leaves early. I consider Chinese privet to be deciduous. They're just tardily deciduous, so they keep their leaves through the winter, and then they drop them as the new leaves come on. And sometimes that one process can get ahead of the other one, so they can go, they can lose their leaves. You'll see that on sunshine ligustrum sometime, which are non-seedy, but mine's a little bit thin over here. I don't think it's actually in the shot, but it's very thin this year. The shedding has happened before the new leaves have started. It just sometimes it lines up properly and sometimes it doesn't. But they'll flush right back out. No, nothing's going to kill them. Very few things will kill them. Let's see. Somebody asked about just new flower bed at Vice. And again, if you watched that video this week on how I expanded this bed, I literally just get down to bare dirt, get the weeds and everything removed from an area, and then just compost it. My big annual bed out in the front garden space is about 2/3 compost and about 1/3 pine bark soil conditioner, if you can find pine bark soil conditioner. If you can't, all compost is fine, and the compost will get mixed into your native soil as you're planting stuff, and you'll find that that's totally adequate for most of your interesting flowering things. Yours might not be the fastest growing in the world. I put my stuff in. It's not the fastest growing in the world. My pansies aren't the fastest growing pansies in the world, nor do I want the fastest growing pansies in the world. I want slow and steady growth. My entire process here is improve the soil and go for slow and steady. Slow and steady prevents lots of problems. So trust that process. Also trust that if you're improving spaces, if you're adding compost every year and you're working on your garden beds, that the first year is not going to be the best year. Second year probably not going to be the best year. By the third or fourth year, following a process of doing it naturally and keeping the ground covered, your beds will improve, your plants will grow faster, you'll have bigger, better flowers, and there you go. My pansies are better this year than they were last year. They'll be even better next year going into the same spaces. Yeah, okay, so I talked about insect problems, some insect problems last week, and somebody had commented, if you have aphids, just hit them with a water hose, and I agree. That's one thing. A lot of these sucking, chewing insects can just be knocked off with a water hose, and they don't come back very readily. And if you can sometimes just limit their population, then they're just not doing significant enough damage to the plants to worry about them. So yes, a water hose is a great weapon in the garden. And your plants get water at the same time. So somebody asked me, when I remove plants, do I leave the roots? So like when I'm taking out these pansies to put in new annuals, I'll pull them, and for the most part they'll break off, and so I'm leaving a lot of that organic material in the ground. Occasionally the whole root system will come up, but I'm doing it really quickly. I could just easily cut them off and leave the root system in the ground, and that wouldn't bother me at all. But I'm just trying for speed, and I can tear out one of these spaces just super, super fast. Some of the roots are coming out, some of the roots aren't coming out. Who cares? I keep moving. But it is good organic material. The stuff that comes out goes on the compost pile. So regardless, it's going to find its way back through the process, whether you're pulling it out or not pulling it out. Somebody asked me about using polyurethane on a raised bed, on wood on a raised bed. From what I understand, all of those types of wood protectants like that, once they're dry, are supposed to be food safe. It's probably not for me. I would, I think Gardeners has a whey-based wood protector that you can paint onto it. So check the Gardeners website, or Google that, Gardeners wood protectant or something like that. I think they have a natural one. You can tell me the polyurethane's fine. But actually, tabletops are polyurethane typically. So obviously, if they weren't, but we're not using them as chopping boards either. So it's not like we're eating the polyurethane. So I don't know. I don't want to eat a bunch of polyurethane. I know that. Let's see. How do I know? Somebody asked, how do they know their seedlings are ready for the ground? As long as the roots will hold together. So if you have tomato plants, any kind of plants that you're doing seedlings on, if you can tug on them very gently, squeeze the bottom of the root area on the plastic, pull on it very gently, and if the soil will come out with the roots, they can go ahead and go in the ground. If they're coming loose, as you're pulling them out and the soil's not coming with it, I'd probably wait another few days before I transplant those. They're still transplantable, even bare root, but I would rather have have the whole, I'd rather have more root system holding the soil together. God, that's a lot of words for nothing. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked if I have people looking out here at the landscape. I do have more people that walk their dogs this way, that's for sure. It's quite the color. It's quite the color show out there. And then somebody asked me if I get camellia scale. I have 7 or 8 camellias out here. I think in every camellia video I've ever talked about, I talked about putting them kind of out in a little more open space so they can get some air movement around them. I tend to get less camellia scale. Even when I get camellia scale, it's minor enough that I don't worry about it. Usually healthy plants can kind of overcome it. If you're getting it bad enough that it's harming the plants, the only spraying I would ever do on something like that would be dormant oil in the wintertime, so that you're not, use dormant oil in the cool season and try to get up underneath the leaves with the dormant oil. But I never have it bad enough that it causes me a problem where I end up spraying mine. But I probably could find some T-scale under a leaf here or there in my 7 camellias. I'm just not stressing about it. I don't care. I'm still getting lots of flowers. They still all seem healthy. Nothing is being stunted by them. So, let them have at it. So thank you guys for following along with the channel. I've got some really good content, I think, coming up here in the next few weeks. And thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.